Welcome to the Coptimizer podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flannelly, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. As usual, I've got another fantastic guest. We have, what would be the best way to capture the essence of Ken Strange, author, FBI agent, OIG specialist, and there's a few other things in there as well, but there's a lot of people out there that can say I've been there and done that, and Ken is clearly one of them. He's the author of A Cop's Son. I'm going to throw it up here. We'll talk about it later at the end. And
Hey, I got one of those.
oh, look at that right there. Oh,
Kind of
your
it's
your
fading. It's
background
going.
AI is
Yeah,
that
it's
looks.
kind of killing it. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Very
There you go.
magical.
Coming in. Yeah.
Very mysterious. How is he making that book disappear?
Now you see it. Now you don't. Ghost author.
But Ken, I really do appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pat. It is a pleasure, an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, you have a ton of stories. And just to kind of encapsulate that, the subtitle of your book, A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. That's a lot. Any one of those
Yeah.
things is a
Yeah.
lot. Like
That's
now,
what my
so now you want to talk about all three. I was like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, like this is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, that's what my
Uh,
publisher said. That's a lot.
yeah, I'm surprised they were kind of like, you know what? Let's start with one book and then we'll have three sub books. And
Yeah, so
one could
yeah,
just
yeah.
be just kind of like the setup, kind of like the story of Ken and like
hmm
your
hmm
journey to the FBI,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy.
Well, it's kind of funny because I am working on a third book. It's called Land of Sand, and it's a kind of coming of age love story set in the Middle East. And that was kind of what kind of teed that this whole thing up, because I ended up as a teacher in the Middle East, teaching English to the royal family, Saudi Arabian royal family, at a school for the royal family. And that exposure in the Middle East for like 5 years, that, I every day I would pass construction signs going to school that said Bin Laden Construction Company, and I'm there maybe 1 month, and the rebels take the holy mosque in Mecca, and then there's then they're beheaded. I found myself in the Middle East, and I'm surrounded by terrorism. I'm learning about Shiites, Sunnis, and then probably the most interesting thing that happened was, going to Cairo and then visiting the grandstand where Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981. And so I show up there in 1985, and the bullet holes are still there. And I'm poking my fingers into the bullet holes where Islamic Jihad assassinated Sadat and like 9 other dignitaries. And I didn't realize at the time that I was kind of on a collision course with the head of the Islamic Jihad, the Sheikh, the blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, and that we would end up on a street corner in Jersey City, going toe to toe, jaw to jaw in Arabic with this guy. So it's just if you could have told me that at the time, I would have said you're freaking nuts. That never could happen, but it did.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get to that story because that's a good one. And for a lot of like for young people today, my audience is generally cops. Um, terrorism really became real in 2001,
Hmm. Hmm.
with what
Hmm.
happened with the World Trade Center.
Hmm.
But a
Yep.
lot of people forget that that was the second bombing. The
Ah,
93
yes.
World Trade Center bombing happened.
Right.
And even before that, I served in the Air Force from 1986 to 1990.
Oh,
And
okay.
I
Okay.
was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina. I was in the security police there, and
Sure.
we uh, we used to run what they called MSTs. Like we were a military airlift command. I don't think they call that. I think they've changed all the names for everything. But
Hmm.
it was basically um, it was C-141s at the time, C-5 Galaxies.
Oh, yeah.
But they
Yeah.
used to run these embassy support runs out of the East Coast up. So we would travel, or the aircraft from Charleston would travel usually up into Spain, into Germany, and then
Hmm.
down into the Middle East, and then down all through Africa. And we were having issues with terrorist bombings in Germany at Ramstein Air
Hmm.
Force
Hmm.
Base and other
Hmm. Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
And so they started these MSTs partly due to with the concept that they wanted to have security for these planes when they were flying through uh, the Middle East and stopping in places and then going on to Africa. So uh, yeah, I mean it was interesting to me when I was reading some of your stories and hearing some of these names that I hadn't heard for a long time
Right.
and
Right.
and connecting all the way back and even I don't know if I have it right here. But I read it was years ago, one of the first books that was written on the World Trade Center bombing of in 1993. It was I think it was published in 1998. It was my first couple of years on the job, but
Yeah. Yeah. There was several books, right? Looming Tower, and Gert Getz or Gertz had written a book as well. There was
yes.
several books.
Oh, it's gonna come. It'll come to me in a minute.
Sure.
But anyway, before we kick all that off, I kind of I want to go back because when I was reading the preface in your book, this is the Coptimizer podcast. We talk about cop optimization. One of the things that I'm really working hard toward and trying to help young officers, experienced leaders is to know that like this job can really take a toll on you physically, spiritually,
Hmm. Hmm.
mentally,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it, it 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 would behoove you to know that going in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes I like to think about, it's easy for us that, those of us on the back end of our career and retirement to look back and reflect on what you might do differently, but sharing some of these lessons is kind of at the core of my mission and what I'm trying to do now.
Right.
And you wrote something that really struck me, that right off the bat in the preface, and you were talking about the being young and ambitious, and embracing that mindset of what we would call the sheepdog, protecting the flock.
Yes.
You had you said, well, maybe now in retirement you are maybe an old sheepdog.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
But your advice would be, looking back to people that are on the job today, is strive for balance,
Balance.
spend time with your family, cultivate spirituality,
Yeah.
maintain friendships outside of the badge.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, and this kind of goes along with the work that I do with Institute for Intergovernmental Research. I'm a instructor for their Safe Leo program, which is a
Hmm.
suicide awareness and prevention program for law enforcement.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And that is, never hesitate to seek help if
Right. Right.
you're not feeling right, or you think something's off, or you're just struggling to deal with
Right.
the
Right.
emotions, and
Yep.
not just, it's not just the physical trauma from this job, but the emotional toll that
Yeah.
PTSD.
It's
uh,
real. It's
and
yep.
yeah, it definitely is real. And sometimes you don't realize it until you get a chance to step away, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
and go again
Yeah.
back to reflection. But
Yeah.
anyway, I just,
Y-
yeah, I thought that was pretty deep personal advice that you were giving, and I just want to make, so my first question really is, why is it important to start there? And what do you think young officers, and especially leaders, what do you think they need to hear the most, or what do you think could, impart that wisdom the
Yeah.
best?
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on it, Pat, and it's really seeking, like anything in life, you want to seek balance. You don't want to get caught up in just one thing obsessively into one thing. And it's nice to have a career. It's wonderful to have a career. And if law enforcement is something you've been dreaming about, and you could finally realize that dream, I think it's wonderful. It's phenomenal. But again, having been there, done that, and you know this all too well. If I could take one of these men or women aside, I'd say, look, put it in perspective. Strive for balance in your life. Be the best cop or agent or law enforcement officer you can possibly be, but don't forget your family. Spend time with your family. Have friends. I mean, not just law enforcement, but people from other walks of life. That helps for the balance. And spirituality is another thing. Take a walk in your national park, and take a closer look at that bird or that butterfly, and there's a higher power than we are that's kind of watching over us, and cultivate that spirituality, and do good works. Get involved in, if you're involved in a church or a mosque or a temple, get involved, and it's not just law, there's not just law enforcement, it's a much wider world. You're doing a great job, and you're doing um, a necessary job in our society, but again, I just keep circling back to that balance. Find the balance.
Yeah, it's not just for Danielson, right? Let's
Right.
find balance, Danielson.
Okay, young grasshopper.
It's true. It's definitely true. And I've talked about that a few times in the past. I shared a little video from last summer. Um, speaking of national parks, when I took my oldest son and I went up to Isle Royal, which is in Lake Superior, and we plan
Mm.
on our plan is to go back later this summer and hike the island again, it was
Fantastic.
awesome. It was awesome.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Nature has a way of just kind of calming you down
Yeah.
most of the time.
I don't know if you're a hunter or not, if you've ever been a hunter. I had a brother that was always trying to get me to hunt, and I've talked about this a few times, but I took up A couple of the guys I work with, huge bow hunters, always, talking about
Hmm.
extolling the virtues of bow hunting. And I was
Right.
just kind of like, I was always too busy, whatever. Yeah, someday, I was into fitness and doing stuff like that. And then it was, finally I went, I bought, it was a couple years before I retired. I bought a bow. I got some lessons, retired cop, who one of these guys was always telling me I should do it. Uh, Brian Baker. I did it. I went out, and what struck me was the first time I sat in a tree stand, I was there for about 3 hours, sitting down in this valley, beautiful spot,
Hmm.
here in right along the Wildcat Creek in the county where I live, and no cell coverage. Like my cell phone wasn't working in this little valley that I was in.
Wow. Wow.
And so it was like one of the first times in a long time that I had been forced to spend like 3 hours by myself with no distractions.
Nice. I love it.
And it was awesome. I walked out
I'm
of there. I
sure.
was like, I came home and it's just like,
Yeah,
my wife and my kids were out. Did you get anything? I was like, I got peace and quiet. Like,
yeah.
I
That's
was like, that
that's
was
the same.
amazing.
That is
Yeah.
amazing.
But
That's great.
at the same time, it was a little scary sitting out there, trapped with your own thoughts and
Hmm.
nothing but quiet. But um,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So anyway, we could talk about meditation, all that, but I just just go sit in a tree stand, or like you
Yeah.
said, take a walk in nature. That is meditation in and of itself.
Sure. Sure. And that was the subject of my first book, which was the Camino book, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, where we're walking 500 miles
Oh
in
wow.
31 days, and we're still married after all that. But
I haven't read that book, but I'm so glad you mentioned that because um, I have a friend, and actually a niece that um, have been telling me I need to go do this.
you do. It's a life-changing event, and I didn't realize at the time, but here was my chance to write my first book, which I'd been trying to do for many, many years. I could write criminal reports, I could write all kinds of action reports, but here was a chance to just write about what's in my soul and what's in my brain, and it had so much material to offer. And the story was really about the other pilgrims, and it's such a it's a phenomenon. It's a social cultural phenomenon. When we did that Camino, when we did the
So
pilgrimage, it
you're
was
real quick, yeah. Tell
yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela is a pilgrimage, and it's been in effect for over 1,000 years. And at one point when it started, you had the Knights Templar, which were the basically protecting the pilgrims as they made their way from all parts of Europe, mostly France, but all parts of Europe to Spain to pay homage to Saint James the Apostle, who was supposedly buried there after taking a boat trip from Israel or the Middle East, and his bones lie in Santiago de Compostela. So, at the time the pilgrimages were you could go to Rome, you could go to Jerusalem, you could go to Santiago, and many of the people without money, the pilgrims without money, chose Santiago de Compostela. So we did this trip. It's a phenomenon. When we went, there were 327,000 of us, during that season. Now it's 500,000. It's just it's taken off, and it's got your name on it, Pat.
All right.
I'm trying to promote it.
I love it. Yeah, no, it's so Michael Easter, I follow him. He's a writer. He's written just several books that I've gotten a lot out of, but he just finished up. He just did a just under 800-mile hike
Whoa!
through the desert out in California.
Wow!
Yeah, and
Wow!
yeah, it's pretty cool. He has a blog called the 2%, um, and it's pretty good. Yeah, I think, and for people that are interested, and I have another friend who's a guest that's been on the podcast, Lucas Woody. He's going out to Death Valley, and he's going to do a hike at the end of this summer. It's I can't remember the name, but it's called Lowest to Highest, like from like
Death
valley to
Valley.
peak. Yeah, Valley to
Yeah,
Peak, where you
yep.
start in Death Valley and then
And you go up to Mount Whitney.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
unbelievable. Yeah, yeah,
he's doing that.
we've climbed Mount Whitney. My supervisor, FBI supervisor, Dan Sainer, when he retired from the FBI in Los Angeles, the first thing he did was he got on the Pacific Crest Trail down on the Mexican California border, and 4 months later, he made it to Canada. Now he lost 40 pounds doing it,
Wow.
but I met him in Kennedy Meadows, kind of halfway in through California, and we hiked a few hours together. And I said, I guess I better go back because I don't have a backpack. I can't stay out here with you. So it was nice to see him. And then he finished it. And then his wife wrote a fictitious story about terrorism on the Pacific Crest Trail, believe it or not.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, I'm going to come back to the book writing too, because I have two projects ongoing. They've been
No,
ongoing for a while.
nice, nice. No, that's good.
So,
Mine was ongoing for 60 years.
yeah,
Don't worry
I think
about
that's kind of where I feel like one, I'm trying to, it's, what's the saying about when you try to catch two birds?
Yeah.
Um, I need to focus on one, but
One
I
thing at
think
a time. Yeah.
yeah,
I hear you.
that's the ADHD in me, I think.
Love it.
All right,
That's good. Yeah.
the book that we're talking about today, A Cop's Son, is, yeah, and you wrote a really nice homage to your dad in there too. But your dad was an NYPD veteran, spent 38
hmm
years there.
hmm
So obviously a huge
Huge.
influence on you and your
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
kind of
Huge.
like, what does that
Huge.
legacy mean to you, and how did it really shape your path into
hmm
being a going from that to being a teacher in Saudi Arabia to then becoming
hmm
a special agent with the FBI?
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's a great question. My dad meant virtually everything to me as, sons and fathers. He was a wonderful, wonderful role model. I embraced what he was doing. I enjoyed being around him and his colleagues. And I would, as a cop's son, you would end up going to the precinct to pick up the paycheck, and then everyone would kind of wave at you and hey Kenny, how's your son doing? Hey kid, hey sport, how you doing? These were the good guys to me, and I knew that they protected society. I liked who they were. I liked by and large, I liked their morality, their ethics. They were fun people. They were sensitive people. And we had barbecues in the summer, police athletic league, the whole thing. So, it'd even take me when he was in motorcycle precinct number 2 in Brooklyn. Um, he's driving around on a Harley Super, and he was even part of the Papal Motorcade back in, I think, 1964 or 65, something like that, to Yankee Stadium. But he would take me to visit some of the fellas that had fallen down or had been in accidents with the motorcycle, and visit with them in the hospital. So, I mean, I got to know cops pretty well, and I love them. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind being a cop myself. And so, at every chance I get, I watch cop movies and Dirty Harry, and I do all these impersonations with my buddies, and make my day. Well, punk, the whole thing.
Do you
And not
feel
just that.
lucky?
Do you feel lucky, punk? Well, yeah, Gene Hackman, French Connection, Serpico. My dad knew Serpico, had met Serpico. So I knew that whole kind of world, and I loved it, and there were lots of stories to tell, which kind of ran into what I like to do too, and so I thought maybe one day I'm going to do this. But what's interesting is my father had so many other interests. To me, he was a kind of a Renaissance type figure. I mean, not only law enforcement, but he knew planes and cars and languages, and he was a painter, and loved sailboats, and all. He was just a unique individual with a photographic memory. So
Wow. That's
that
that's
was
always that's beneficial to a cop, right?
oh, he was always whenever he tested, Pat, whenever he tested, he always hit the top five. Always. I mean, this guy had he had a prodigious memory. You know, much faster than mine. So what that kind of told me too was to look into other things in the world. You know, that there was not just law enforcement, but there were other things out there. And then he got me, you know, I got to blame him for something. He got me involved in Spanish because, you know, he was I guess he was a officer in a Hispanic neighborhood at one time, and then he liked people. He really loved people. And so, you know, he would listen to these Spanish records down the basement, these, you know, vinyl things, 33s going around, spinning around. And one morning I heard him down the basement, and I went down. I said, "Dad, what are you doing? Good morning." And he said, "Son, I'm learning Spanish. Come join me." And I joined him because, hey, oh wow, my father and me, I could have some time with him. And now I'm repeating Spanish, Arturo, Isabel, you know, and I loved it. I loved what I heard. And I said, wow, I like the Spanish. So he got me interested in Spanish, which led me into a career as a Spanish teacher initially. It started off that way. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I love that story when you were talking about it in the book. Yeah, that was yeah, I mean, and it's kind of here's a question for you because I this is a question that I ask. I teach this class for new chiefs at our academy every year. And one of the questions that I like to ask is, we know we have a recruitment issue that's going on. We're just the numbers are just way, way down. People are not interested in this career. And I got into the habit of asking, I started this probably right around the Ferguson days back in
Mm, hmm
2014, 2015. Like, how many of you in this room are encouraging your sons and daughters or you know family, friends, loved ones to enter the career of policing?
Right.
And no hands go up.
Oh,
And very rarely a hand goes up. And then so it just begs the question, right? How many of you are actively discouraging them?
mm.
And almost every hand goes up. Like, and
Okay.
so, when I hear your story and I juxtapose that against what's happening today, it's not hard to understand why we have a recruitment issue. I mean, and that's just one factor of it. There's a reason why police officers today are concerned about their loved ones entering this profession. And I think,
Hmm hmm
I think in order for us to turn it around, hearing more stories like yours, I think could maybe refresh our memory of a better time and
hmm
hopefully influence decision makers today to understand that we have to protect our police officers and you know
Hey, Pat, it's a noble profession. It's
yeah.
noble. Absolutely. And I learned that. And that's finally what prompted me to say, you know what? Teaching's wonderful, and I've had a great gig at teaching, and maybe I can return to teaching later in my life. But for now, this is the noblest of professions for me, and I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to try to make a difference. So I think you're absolutely right.
Well, and you did. You- I mean, going back to that, yeah, I mean that was kind of maybe that would be a great place to start and kind of like. Well, even I don't know. You had some really cool stories too about being in when you're at your time at Quantico.
Yeah.
So what was, I mean, so maybe let's tie that off from that story you told at the beginning when like you're in Egypt,
Right.
and then how long is it until you're in Quantico and
hmm
starting your career with the FBI?
Right. I mean, so that's 1985. That's when I finished up my 6 years in Saudi Arabia, 1985. And the next year, I was in 86. I started graduate school in Thunderbird School of Global Management in Arizona, in Glendale, Arizona. So this was a school. So this was now my second master's degree. But I wanted to try business, see what that was all about. I was interested in business as well. So what was interesting is that I didn't realize that the FBI and the CIA were recruiting heavily from this particular school. They liked people that had been overseas, that had language, maybe a language background, an advanced degree, whatever it was. They were heavily recruiting from our school. So I met with a CIA rep, and I met this wonderful Mormon special agent out of Salt Lake City, and we sat down, and he said, "Look, as an FBI agent, you'll never be poor, you'll never be rich." But you'll have a steady job. That sounded pretty good to me. And he said, I like your background. You know, you're fluent in Spanish, and we can get you in under the Spanish language program. You also know Arabic. You have some basic Arabic, and you been overseas in Saudi Arabia, so you know about terrorism. And we could use someone like you. And that's when I got excited, and I said, "Wow, they could use me. Someone, a sense of purpose." And so I said, sign me on." And that was the beginning of the FBI recruiting process.
A sense of purpose. That's awesome. My dad was, both my mom and dad are from Scranton, Pennsylvania. That's like, I'm the youngest of eight kids, Irish Catholic family.
Yep.
My
Yep.
mom's dad was a police officer in Scranton,
Hmm.
Jerome Boyd.
Wow.
And my dad, when he went to Penn State, got his undergrad, and uh, he got commissioned, went into the army because it was during the Korean War.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So he went to Korea and spent a few years in Korea. And in Korea, he wound up being his commanding officer. He was basically his aide was Louis Truman, who was the nephew of President Harry Truman. And
Harry Truman. Yeah.
Louis Truman was a World War II veteran, um, and then eventually wound up finishing as a two-star general. But he wanted my dad to come with him after Korea, to come with him to Georgia to continue to work with him. But my dad decided to go to law school, so
Wow. Wow.
he went to Catholic University in
Yeah.
D.C.
Washington, D.C. Yeah, sure.
And when he came out, he got recruited by the FBI,
Oh,
and
wow. Wow.
so
Wow.
yeah, and he didn't tell me this until I think I was in high school, and when I started expressing an interest in wanting to work in law enforcement.
Right. 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 Right.
Um, he decided not to, but um, I was that was but just kind of tying back into that, I'm kind of stuck in repeat here with just thinking about like these lineages, family heritage, um, and then just kind of the influences and where they push you. So like the language portion of it, speaking Spanish, and then so you wind up in Saudi Arabia, and then what languages did you learn there before you went to grad school in Glendale?
Yeah. So just
So obviously,
Spanish, of course. And I took a junior year abroad to Spain. I lived in Madrid, went to school in Madrid with Marquette University for a year. So that kind of that really was the kind of epitome of the Spanish language study for me.
okay.
It didn't get any better than that. And at the time I was thinking about teaching college Spanish, but the way things worked out, it didn't happen. It kind of led back to it took me again, and I'm the type of person that when doors open up, I'll look at it, and I'll usually go through the door. I mean, I'll weigh things, but I'll take the chance because there's something be in this door, and I think it's gonna shape me, mold me, test me, whatever. So that's pretty much what happened. And each time I did that, there was another skill set that I was picking up. I just didn't know it at the time. It'd be Spanish and then Arabic, and then I'm learning about terrorism, and I'm fascinated with terrorism and all the groups, Baader Meinhof, Japanese Red Army, Islamic Jihad, and I'm slowly learning, and I'm working with Palestinians who are telling me that, we don't have a home, and here's our story, and oh, this guy's a Shiite. Oh, you're different from Sunnis, and what's your story? Oh, we were massacred at the same time that the rebellion in Saudi Arabia took place. They were killing us over in Qatif. Did you know that? No, I didn't. And what's your beef? Oh my God. Okay. So all of these things were kind of just adding to my to this background that to this yeah, I mean, to my personality, and that's I think that's what pushed me into law enforcement.
So yeah, I mean, I think the lesson here is it's really interesting to see. It's not just how history influences where we wind up in the future, right? Fathers influence sons and daughters, or they don't, in terms of where they go. Your experience in the Middle East now getting a taste for disputes that have been, because the U.S. is such a young country, right? It's only,
Hmm.
in the grand scheme of things,
Right.
you know, it
Yeah,
hasn't been around that long, but some of
right.
these beefs that you're talking about are thousands of
Oh,
years
dude,
old.
generational, right? Generational. You go. I said to one Palestinian guy who was my supervisor, I said, are you going home for the holidays?" And he looks at me, he says, "I have no home." It's like, oh, okay, sorry, I forgot, those bad Israelis, I forgot, yeah, just funny stuff, really interesting stuff.
So, so you mentioned jihad, and then one of the stories you have in the book is, I think it's called "The Enabler of Death." So
Mhm.
you describe, um, I don't know, we don't necessarily have to talk about that. I'm just really curious, like, well, plus if I go to your like thinking back just to your experience at Quantico, like you definitely had a different path than most agents. You
Yeah,
just from my experience, like you
yes.
didn't go work the street in a typical sense after you came
No,
out of Quantico. A lot of
no,
that was because
no,
of your
yeah,
background and your experience. So, you
that's right.
know,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
wind up going working some of these like cases, like I don't know. You were talking about working in that safe house
oh, with the Russian defector.
with the Russian defector. Yeah.
Oh, what a wonderful, what a sad story. That's one of that truly broke my heart. And to think that, this was the time Vladimir Putin was in the KGB, so he certainly would have known about our friend, certainly would have known about it. And in the background, you had CIA operative at the same time, Aldrich Ames, who was also playing footsies with the Russians, and I'm sure he was forwarding information about our guy and what he had given up. And oh, it was terribly sad. And that was one of my first experiences with the Bureau. And yeah, that's a tough one. That was a tough one.
So, I mean, was counterterrorism, was the CT squads, were they fairly new at that time? Was that kind of like a
Yeah.
burgeoning specialty inside of the agency?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I like the way you phrased it, burgeoning. It was truly that. When I arrived, and I wasn't welcome initially by my supervisor. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yep, yep.
he
Gave
said,
you
"What
a
do you?"
kind of a rude welcome, like,
Yes,
what
yeah,
are you doing here?
yeah,
Like,
hey, yeah, dude. You should be with the others. I don't know how you got here, and I don't know, but you shouldn't be here. But what the hell? Now you're here. There's nothing I can do about it. So get to work. Um, that wasn't a really nice welcoming, but at the time, very few FBI agents, and I can't blame them, didn't know much about the Middle East or about terrorism. I mean, they knew domestic terrorism fairly well, but Middle East terrorism was something pretty new. It was new. So I brought that skill set to the table, and and knowing Arabic and knowing the culture, living there, I could go out into these Muslim communities, and I could make friends, and I could find sources and informants, and I met a lot of good people. I mean, there were some sources that were just in it for the money, and some of them were murky and dirty, and for sure, you meet all types. But by and large, the Muslim community said, "We don't want them here. They are all they talk about is death and going to Allah. We are here with our kids. We want a better future. Please help us get rid of these people. People like Sheik Omar Abdel Rahman, the enabler of death, and others, the other minions, the minions of Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman. So, I was only too glad to work with these people. I love them. I'm still in touch with one or two of these folks.
So what was maybe just like some of the highlights of that time? Because I mean, you talked about that case. Where were you when the first bombing attempt on the World Trade Center occurred?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually with my second agency. I was in Washington, D.C. I was working for the Agency for International Development with the Office of Inspector General. And I remember getting up, getting ready to go to work in Roslyn, Virginia. And I got the newspaper. I looked at the newspaper and I said, holy shit. Holy shit. The cover was this guy that I tried to recruit on a train, on the PATH train going right in the World Trade Center, right in the World Trade Center. I tried recruiting this guy. So it was so incredible. I said to my wife, holy, look at this. I know this guy. And, she kind of said, oh, yeah, sure. You're exaggerating again. I said, no, no, oh boy, this is going to be a long day because I knew the story. I knew I tried to recruit him in of all places on the train. I handed him my business card. So, within 24 hours, I get a call from my supervisor and he said, hey, we just did a search of this guy, Mohammed Salame, one of the bombers, and we found your business card in his apartment. What the hell's going on? So I had to explain. I had to explain the whole thing, and yeah. So I mean, I knew all the players, although I wasn't there at the time, and sometimes I feel guilty that I wasn't there. Um, in the back of your mind, you think maybe I could have stopped it, maybe, or
What?
maybe I could have been killed. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right? But
yeah.
nevertheless, here was that terrorist. It said the face of terror. I'll never forget it. And I knew all these guys. I'd been to the mosque there. I'd kind of snooped around. I kind of threw my weight around a little bit. Played little head games with them. They were playing head games with us. So I knew Muhammad Salame. I knew all of them.
So that was maybe I skipped ahead a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
because you had left the FBI and went to.
1992, May 1992.
So prior to that, and maybe that's the story that we should rewind to, because you talked about, and it's been a bit since I read that chapter, but you wound up going to one of these mosques and you're walking up the stairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the mosque in Jersey
Okay.
City. Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
walking up the stairs and coming down the stairs was yeah, we called him the Red, and I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he was a goon. He was an Egyptian guy. He was part of, again, one of the minions for the Sheikh. He was the driver, the muscle, probably killed or was part of the murder of Mustafa Shalabi, who was another alpha jihadist. There was a power struggle at the time between the Sheikh and this Mustafa Shalabi, and Shalabi lost. And that's a homicide that NYPD was going through. They were working it, and they never solved the case, but we're pretty sure that Abu Halima was his name. Abu Halima played a role in it. He's in jail now because he was part of the bombers, right? For the in 1993. But I'm sure he was a part of the murder of Shalabi as well. And one of the fascinating parts of that whole story is, I had gone over shortly before I left. I went over to the 60 precinct in Coney Island when my father had been a sergeant at one time, and I said to the police officers, I'd like to look at the Shalaby file. And while I was, because I was trying to nail Abu Halima, and so I'm looking through it, and what I found was incredible. I found all of these U.S. Army Fort Bragg related paraphernalia all over the place, and I said, "What the hell is this?" Somebody, one of these guys, one of these jihadists, has got a connection into Fort Bragg in the Special Warfare School. And I'm seeing all these manuals. Some of them was secret, said secret, and the PD wasn't interested. And I remember I said, "Hey, look," and the guy said, the desk sergeant says, "Hey, they're foreigners. What do I care?" And I'm like, I care. I do care. That's why I'm here. I couldn't blame them, but oh my
Yeah.
God. And not realizing that, of course I left, but not real. And I remember going back to my squad supervisor and saying, please, I made copies. Please look at this stuff. Something is going on. There's some nexus to Fort Bragg. And it was never followed up, apparently. I blame myself a little bit for that, but I did try to tell them. And it turned out we had a triple agent, double triple agent named Ali Mohammed, Sergeant Ali Mohammed, Egyptian soldier, came to Fort Bragg, burrowed in, burrowed into the special forces, was taking stuff. Coming up, he was coming up from North Carolina on the weekends, some weekends up to New Jersey, up to Brooklyn, and doing firearms training with these jihadists. And then on his vacations, he'd go to Afghanistan, do some fighting there, and then end up in Sudan. And he was doing security work for bin Laden. And he goes on to do the bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. And it was right there. We had it right there. All the stuff was there. You just had to connect the dots. And that's probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, he was part of the embassy bombing in
Yes, yes,
Nairobi.
that's it. That's right.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, yeah, that and I remember that really stuck out to me because I made a couple on some of those MSTs that I went on. We had restovers in Nairobi,
Okay.
so I
Yeah.
stayed at the Intercontinental
Oh,
Hotel right there, not far from the U.S. Embassy.
wow.
Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so I just remember when that happened, like
Yeah.
having been there, it's just
Yeah.
those things always stick with you. And
Yeah.
I don't want to kind of go off on too far of a tangent here, but you think about like what you just described, and then you think about 9/11, and it's it's easy to point fingers in hindsight and kind of say, ah, woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Hmm.
But if you don't have systems that are set up to, that are really built and designed to make sure that leakage like that gets captured,
Right.
it's inevitable that you're going to miss stuff because there's only so much information that any one person can keep in their noggin.
Right. Right.
So even someone like you with the amazing background, the experience that you have, you probably have a photographic memory like your dad did as well, because the way you tell your stories too, I'm like, how does he remember all this stuff? Like sometimes I go back and read old police reports. I'm like, I don't remember any of that. But, like a lot of it, some things I will do that are permanently seared in my brain.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah. Yeah.
other things like I just don't remember it. Like maybe I was like, of course, I worked nights for 15 years. That probably didn't help me, but uh,
I've had my moments, believe me. I don't remember stuff.
I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. Well, first of all, like, what was the motivation? What was the nexus for? I can't remember why you left the FBI and went to
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, that
Yes.
OIG spot.
Yeah. So the last thing I worked with in the Bureau was the pretty much the Gulf War. And we were pretty busy with our informants and Saddam Hussein. We were afraid Saddam Hussein would have terrorists planted in New Jersey, New York, and that type of stuff. And one of the interesting parts was meeting up with a Ba'athist, Palestinian Ba'athist agent, a Palestinian born in Iraq who was kind of Saddam Hussein's gopher, his lackey. And but he had burrowed into our office and was providing information about Iran, a totally misdirection. It was total misdirection. In the meantime, he's probably asking our agents, what are you guys doing? What are you investigating? And not realizing that he was Saddam Hussein's errand boy. So, and I found out, well, a number of ways. Intuitively, I knew something was wrong when I met him. He was just too cool and too. He just something smelled. And then I had an informant who was right in on the guy, which was fantastic. So, he
Oh
was
yeah,
telling
that
me,
helps.
this guy is not who he is, who he says he is. He's definitely not. And then, the climax, if you will, is when, I went to his apartment and he just couldn't help himself. And he puts in that video of him in Baghdad with Saddam Hussein at a party. And he said, now this is power, not Bush. Saddam is power. And, he's almost frothing at the lip, he's like sexually excited. And I'm like, holy crap, don't, so I have my hand on my gun. This
Yeah.
guy he's totally out. He's bonkers, going bonkers. But it was nice to kind of disrupt his activities. That's, as he said, Mr. Ken, you fucked me good. Excuse my language. And I was only too happy to do so because he was just a liar. He was, yeah, doing, little things for Saddam. Check this out. Look if we can get centrifuges. We need to buy this and that. After they bomb the runways, we need asphalt. I want you to source it in the U.S., see if we can do something. So that's what this guy was about. So that was kind of my last hurrah on the squad. And then I was recruited to the next job by two former FBI agents who, like me, love to travel. And they said, hey, we're part of this little elite fraud unit at AID. And, we know you don't know fraud as a discipline, but we can teach it to you. I think you'll love it. And, we can get you to Latin America. You speak Spanish. We can have you in Costa Rica within a year or two. So that to me was interesting. Again, these doors that open and, I'm trying something new. And so I walked through that door.
Well, I think that says something about you too as an individual, like always looking for another challenge, always expanding. Um, uh, and I think sometimes people they settle, right? You get into a job, you figure it out, you get kind of good at it, and then um, if you wait just a little bit too long, like you mentioned, like I just had this conversation with one of my sons not too long ago. It's like every time you get these chances, these opportunities where doors open, right? And if you walk through them, you're going to find more doors. But the door you
Right.
don't walk through, right, you'll never know what was behind there and you don't know where it might take you.
Absolutely.
So,
You're right. You're
so
right.
before you choose not to go through the door,
Mhm.
you have to, make sure you're doing it for all the right reasons.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that's yeah, oh man,
So yeah, so
but
that took me into a kind of whole different world, the whole different world. But again, the Bureau was always kind of whispering in my ear. And if you remember the book, I got a call from I'm in Costa Rica one year, and I got a call from the unit chief in Washington, and he said, FBI unit chief, and he said, Strange, we've been looking for you for a year. And I'm like, what the hell are you calling me? What did I do wrong? Right. And he goes, no, 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 don't worry. He said, actually, I want to congratulate you. And I said, about what? And he goes, well, you've made the Hezbollah top 10 list, Hezbollah. And I
oh
said, holy
shit.
shit, Jesus Christ. Thanks a lot. You're joking, aren't you? He goes, no, no, but don't worry. You're in good company. He said, there's another FBI agent from New York and there's a CIA officer with you guys. It's three of you. And we don't know exactly what it means, but they're two separate intelligence agencies from overseas, friendly agencies. And they're saying that you guys are on their list. And the curious part about it, Pat, was I had never worked in Hezbollah matters at all. Nothing. I worked PLO, I worked IRA, I worked Jewish Defense League, I'd worked Black Liberation Army, but never Hezbollah. So I must have wandered into some kind of a cell or pissed somebody off.
Well, if you're doing you go into global fraud investigations and yeah, who knows, right? Like the way those hawalas work, if you tip, you close one door. Speaking of doors, right? You close one door on people there. You never know where that's,
Yeah, it might
who's
be your
getting,
last door.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. I spent a week at SOD, like the Special Operations Division, when I was
Hmm.
working with on that Safe
Hmm.
Streets Task Force, and
Right, right, right,
um, it's like any other investigation, right? Whether you're working global terrorism, whether you're working the cartels, at the
right,
core of that is money and cash.
right,
And
right.
so,
Yeah, yeah,
I think when you're working fraud, you're right. That dunks you right, basically right into the deep end of the pool. Um, I did. I maybe I missed that part. Or so, what were you doing in Costa Rica then? What were your cases there? Because I
yeah,
love Costa Rica. I've been
yeah.
there. I
Oh, okay, you've
absolutely
been
love
there.
it.
Yeah, no, we loved it too. It was a great assignment, great posting. So you can imagine I'm there with my family, little family. My twins were maybe 6, 7 years old, I think, at the time. Maybe they were 7. Yeah, it was absolutely great. But what happened is, I ended up being the last. There were three of us, and then two of them were transferred back to DC. So now it was just me, sitting out there in Costa Rica by myself, which sometimes isn't bad, right? You don't have the boss with you all the time. You kind of do what you want. But sometimes it got lonely. It could be anything. It could be, I remember going to, they called me up and said, get ready to go to Nicaragua you're going to the Mosquito Coast, a place called Puerto Cabezas. And there's apparently a possible embezzlement by a conservation company out of Florida there that they're siphoning off monies, and there's some kind of anomaly that the auditors spotted. So the next thing you know, I'm on a flight to Managua, then I jump on a little kind of puddle jumper plane out of Managua, and I'm flying to Puerto Cabezas, and then I'm not finished with the journey. I mean, I interview a few people. I find out that it's not looking like an embezzlement. It's more like, they're playing around with funds because they have shortfalls in another program in Costa Rica that they're working on about turtles, the turtle hatchery or something like that. And so I have to go in a dugout canoe with an Evinrude on the back on the Caribbean up to Sandy Bay, and we get caught in a storm. I'm like, is this worth it? We're ready to go under, and the look on the guy that's driving the thing, this steering it with the tiller, he has this worried look on his face, where the rain is hitting us from all angles, the waves are getting, everything is look, the ocean looks green. It was frightening. And then you get there, and then I talk to a whole bunch of witnesses, and it's not what it seemed to be. But the thing was, I was able to clarify the case. It wasn't an embezzlement, but this person did, take monies he shouldn't have and plug them into different projects because there were shortfalls. And of course, he was fired. And so, we were able to resolve this complaint. So I did my job, but what a journey to do it. And at night, there's no electricity in this sandy bay. It's a lagoon with these houses on stilts, and when the sun goes down, the candles come out. And what's for food? Oh, turtle eggs and turtle meat. That's it. I mean, it was so primitive. It was primitive, like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. But it was a very interesting
Well,
journey.
I'm
So
glad you survived, but
yeah.
what a cool story too.
Yeah, no, it was interesting, and at the I put a little humor in there. It's kind of a dark humor, no pun intended, because the outhouse was, if you read the book, it was out there on some kind of a walkway, wooden walkway above the swamp, and there's no lights, and I have this little mag light, and then I'm in the crapper, and I'm just kind of sitting there, and the thing slides down my into the crapper, and I see the light just going into this muck and ooze, and you know what, and I'm like, oh my God, and then now all of a sudden we're in darkness, total darkness. I'm like, oh, what do I do now? Help, help, someone come through this door, help me.
Oh man, it reminds me. So I was in Dakar, Senegal, on one of these trips. I'm a 21-year-old, young airman, and we had a mechanical issue with our plane. So
Whoa.
we're stuck for a week in Dakar,
Wow.
Senegal.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, this is like a we were staying at the Intercontinental Hotel, and it's uh, known to be like a little playground for some of the rich French,
Oh, yeah.
so right across the Med, they used to come over.
Sure, sure.
My
That's right.
first, as a young man, my first experience of being on a true topless beach. So that
Oh,
was
yes, that's right. Yes. French, French, French.
well, so we go the whole crew we walk to a bar when it's light outside. And it was probably like a half a mile, and we had walked on like some like a dirt road and stuff to get to this other little small area where there was some restaurants and this bar.
Yeah.
And we drink a few beers, have a little fun. Maybe I drink a few too many beers, and
Could
then it's
happen.
and then
Could
it's
happen.
me and one of the pilots walking back. Like we left on our own, and we were on our way back,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Hey, let's go this way." Like we could see the hotel, and he's like, "Let's go this way. It'll be quicker." Well,
Yes.
we walk up, and then we walk up. We get into this. There's a pond, like it dead ends into
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
wall. So we
Yeah.
have to, and the wall is like, I have to jump up, pull myself on.
Oh my
So we pull
goodness.
ourselves up onto this, and now we can see it's a straight shot right to the hotel. And so he's like, "Let's go," and I was just like it's like 6 inches wide, like a concrete wall, and there's a really nice house over here, and and then we start walking, and I look down, and it's like water and muck and swamp, and
Oh
and I was just
no. Oh God.
like, like this isn't good. And
No.
I'm a couple in, so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
wind up making it all the way across. Jump down, we laugh about it. I go to bed. The next day we were leaving, and so I get up, and I remember coming out with my suitcase or my bag and stuff in the
Yeah.
morning, and I
Right.
look at that wall, and then I look to see like how far we actually went and
Yeah.
what was in there, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that was a terrible
R-
idea."
Oh my
Like,
God. Wow. Wow. I'm glad you guys were safe at the end.
yeah.
Jeez.
So and not a very smart move, but yeah, so that's my mind immediately went there when you were like, yeah, I'm in a strange land
Strange
with
land.
unknown creatures, swamp creatures crawling around, and now it's dark and I have no light.
Right, 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 right.
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. It's I actually I lived in Senegal for a few months. I worked with Save the Children and did some work there, but used it as a base to go all over Africa.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Interesting place.
that was 19 I was there, I think that had to be like 1988.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh
that I was
wow. Oh
there. Yeah,
wow.
it was a
Yeah.
long time ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. It would have been a much different place. Wow. Amazing. But yeah, so that was one of the cases. I did a lot of work. I did some work in Haiti, trying to make a case against the former president of their Haitian Electoral Committee. And, obviously there was a $1 million fraud, but the the records were either missing or in such terrible shape that I really couldn't make a good case out of it. Although I had an assistant U.S. attorney out of Miami, and we were able to find monies going to his brother. Don't ask me how we found the monies, but that's something else. Again, I didn't request it. It was handed to me by a source in a hotel when very murky circumstances, and all of a sudden I have these bank statements in my hand going, I don't think I can use this now,
Yeah,
in a court of American law. But
yeah,
but I
sources
but
don't understand that
yeah,
sometimes.
but I got the idea of what was going on. But in the end, the case did fizzled out. I mean, he resigned because he was under so much pressure from the State Department and from the U.S. government. But that was a very interesting case. That's the first time I was carrying a weapon overseas. I mean, you couldn't you know this. We relied on diplomatic security for protection. We didn't carry we were not authorized to carry weapons, but I did carry this. It's called a baton tactique. the tactical baton made of metal, the one that retracts and
Oh yeah, like
yeah,
an asp. Yeah.
oh boy. And I always felt very comfortable traveling with that thing. And I remember going up onto the plane out of Miami, and the steward says, "What's that?" And it's retracted. So I said, "Oh, it's a flashlight." And he goes, "Oh, okay, passe." It's a flashlight. No, it's baton tactique.
Tone tactique. All
Like
right.
a,
That
yeah.
that's a I speak a little Spanish, but that's new to me. I'm going to write that down. So
But
yeah,
yes, yeah,
and you
yeah,
don't have to go into this if you don't want to, but I'm curious, like what your thoughts are today too. And like just in the last year with Doge and
yeah,
what they're doing
yeah,
with US,
yeah, yeah,
USAID.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I don't know. It seems like we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit in some of these things, but I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe it's necessary.
No,
Maybe it's
maybe you're
not.
right. No, maybe you're right. I think look, I'm just as befuddled about all this as the next guy. Of course, I was there from 92 to 98. And during that time, and I'll be honest with you, yes, the most of the employees and the people that managed the programs and even the contractors, many of them were liberals. But at that time, it didn't matter. People weren't care. We didn't care about people's politics.
Right.
It was all about the mission. And they had some very good programs, Pat. They had anti-malaria, HIV/AIDS, sanitation and wash, democracy building in Ukraine. They had some decent programs. And yeah, there was some fraud, waste, and abuse, but these my colleagues in the agency would call us and say, "We need your help. Something's gone bad, with this program, or there's some kind of a discrepancy, whatever." And so we all worked together. We pulled together to make our cases to successfully, keep the integrity of the programs intact. So when I see today the types of programs that they were peddling out there, I can't believe it. I'm stupefied. I'm amazed. What is this? Trans this in some African nation. How does that help the African nation? It's not applicable. Um, it's just bonkers.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe all the waste that, it's either criminal or it's just a huge waste of monies. So I'm confused.
Yeah, it's got, I just can't help but to think that sh like it's surely they're doing something more productive with that. Maybe it's just some kind of front organization, but that's the back of my mind. I hope for at least there's something productive going on because, most Americans, I don't know what the percentage is, but most never travel to third world countries.
Right,
And
right.
like I remember having this conversation with my dad, who had been in a war zone. But I just after some of my trips to Africa and just coming back and talking with him, I'm just like, you know what? Like even the poorest of the poor in the US, you know, relatively speaking, are some of the wealthiest people in the world, right? It's
Hmm.
like when you see true poverty, it doesn't leave you. So that's why, like, anytime I see programs and things like that, like getting canceled, it does raise a bit of concern for me. Like, there's a
Sure.
lot of good that's going on in the world, and you hate to see all the good work get stopped just because,
Because of
yeah,
some bad actors, and maybe the previous administration had a different view of the world, and but now that's been replaced. So maybe
yeah,
we can get back to normal. I'd be reluctant to actually close down this agency. I would be reluctant
yeah,
because
and
because you know I've been out there, and especially you mentioned Africa, Pat, a lot, and after I retired, after I did my corporate stuff. Well, I did a few corporate gigs in Africa, and what I was noticing is that the Chinese were out there in droves, and they were replacing us as kind of the influence people, and they were selling everything from scooters to they were coming in and doing railroads and ports and just completely taking over from the United States. We were losing our footprint over there. So now we need an agency like AID, I think, more than ever.
Yeah. And so that's where I think maybe that's the greatest lesson is for regardless of your politics, when you start trying to push personal agendas, on a global scale like that, you risk a lot more than just a simple, a single program. You risk the opportunity for number one, improving lives,
Yeah, yeah,
reducing.
right.
But yeah, it's nuts. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off track on that, but I was just kind of curious,
Sure.
and then because I knew this was going to happen. We're already like where I can already see myself like a couple hours from the end here. So I want to maybe let's roll on because one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is about the border and what's going on down there now with your
Hmm.
perspective. But
Yeah, yeah.
prior to that, you wound up doing work. What did you do after AI USAID OIG?
Right. So in 1998, and my last case was this one in Haiti, and we got a new boss, and this lady came in, and well, to be honest with you, it was all about her. She, she's sitting down with me, and I'm going through my cases, and she said, "This case down in Haiti." I said, "Yeah, the AUSA is declining to prosecute the case for these reasons." Okay. And she goes, "Nope, I disagree with your AUSA, and you and I are going to travel down to Miami and we're going to convince him to resume the case." And I'm thinking, what? I don't think that's going to work, but okay, you're the boss. So we head on down there and we meet the prosecutor. Now he's really surprised, like, why are you here? I told you I'm declining the case. And she says, no, I think you should continue with the case. We can make the case. We can go to grand jury, all of this stuff. And he goes, no, no, ma'am, nice to meet you, but you wasted your time coming all the way down here. I'm declining the case for these reasons. End of the story. So then she says, Agent Strange, would you excuse us? So I leave the office, and then she comes out. She's all flustered, angry, pissed. And I said, "What happened?" And he's not going to work the case. I said, yeah, I know. He told me. So she's fuming, and she was hoping. She's one of these people that wanted to arrive at the new agency and hit a home run, like right out of the park or something, and it just wasn't going to happen. So. Um, After that case, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not getting the feeling that she's going to look upon me favorably over the next few years, and I really don't see the chance of advancement with this woman. So I left. But before I left, I mean, I was actually recruited by a former Secret Service agent down in El Paso, and he said, "Hey, I heard about you. You speak Spanish. I could use a Spanish investigator. You've got a nice background, and maybe if you work well for me, I can, we can promote you to the assistant special agent in charge." And then he put his arm around me at night after the dinner that he had, and it was all these lights out on the mesa, like resplendent jewels and diamonds. And he puts his arm around me, and maybe we've had a few drinks, and he goes, "Son, all of this is yours." I think Pat, I may have said something like, "I'm all in. I'm all in." But you know what? It worked out okay. He was a good
That's
man. He was a good man. He was unique, but he was a good man. And he was actually part of the LBJ. He was one of his agents when he died, when LBJ collapsed, Steve gave him mouth to mouth. Actually, he was there right at the ranch. But everything worked very nicely with him. I did everything I was told. I learned how to work cases on the border, and we made some very nice cases. And then he promoted me, and then they promoted me again. They said, "Hey, Steve has groomed you, and there's an opening in Los Angeles, and how would you be interested?" And so that door opened. And then I said, "You know what? I'll go through this door. It's a challenge to run an office on the West Coast. I'm in, you know. So that's what happened. But we made some pretty good border cases, and there were all kinds of cases down there, Pat. And you know, the book I talk about the civil rights case. I talk about a sexual allegation case with a U.S. Marshal Service employee, a Border Patrol agent that is operating under the radar, working with the cartels and using, he's a canine handler and he's using his dog. The cartels are using his dog on the other side of the border to kind of hit on their loads of marijuana and cocaine until the dog cannot hit on it any longer. And then they give him money, they give the dog a bone or whatever it is. And some fascinating cases, really good. And you know, even there's one case we were involved in where the source ends up in this the house of death that they called it, the famous house in Juarez, where people were being put into these uh, I don't
Into
know,
the bucket, into
bucket,
the
it's
55
acid.
gallon drums.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the acid, that type of thing. That was a very controversial case, and I actually knew all the players from that case.
Yeah, Juarez.
Juarez,
I
Juarez, Juarez.
One of my buddies from the service, he went on to become a state trooper for in New Mexico.
Oh
So I
wow.
went to visit him. That was my first and only time to El Paso. We went down to El Paso and then walked over into Juarez.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
And
land bridges there.
yeah, we walked over and of all, again, that was in the mid 90s. Just yeah, and I don't know how much Juarez has changed since then, but extreme poverty.
Extreme poverty. Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
walking over the bridge, we would, saw I'll never forget. I watched there was a big tire inner tube inflated,
Oh
had
wow.
a 2x4 on top of it, strapped on, and three people floating across
The
floating
Rio,
across the
the
river.
Rio Grande.
Yeah, with a bicycle,
Oh my God.
and the border patrol was just waiting for them on the other side.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I remember seeing, just driving to work, I'd be on the 10, hop on the 10, and then sometimes you'd see these illegals going under the fence. They'd cut the fence, going under the fence, and then trying to run across the highway. Like, holy God, please be careful. I mean, we don't want you here, but don't get splattered. Um,
yeah, it's not
yeah,
worth it.
it was a different world. It's not America, but it's not Mexico either. It's this kind of a combination of both. It's one of that border is just unique anywhere in the world. I've been to some places in the world, and it's just unbelievable. My father came down to visit. He's retired now, and I took him on the land bridge, and he said, "My God, son, so many stories." I'm like, "Yeah, Dad. Yeah, Dad. That's why I'm here. Remember those Spanish lessons?"
That's crazy. Well, and people, we don't have to get too deep into this, but we worked a couple of enterprise cases from just here in Midwest, Midwest Indiana that, went all the way down to Mexico.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Yeah, and that's, the connections, the cartels really, I mean, they've always been sophisticated and they've always run pretty good operations, but really when we just had this huge influx of um, Spanish speakers coming in from all over Central and
Wow.
South America. So Mexico, uh, you know, just some of the industry that we have in our community, truck trailer manufacturing
Oh,
plant, a pork
yes.
plant, some of the, like just,
Yeah.
where the labor, they were always coming and looking for labor.
Right. Right.
Um, so many good people that came, but then, you always have the small percentage of the negative that kind of
Yep.
that
Yep.
can drive that, but it's just smart. The cartels know, hey, most local law enforcement in the Midwest, they don't have Spanish speaking officers. They don't understand the culture.
Right.
They basically set up shop right underneath our noses and,
Right.
running these very sophisticated operations. But, I'm kind of curious again, with your experience working down there and now I think it was just absolutely insane what was going on for the last few years, like the number of people coming
No.
across,
No. It's
and then
Yep.
just a change in policy. Like that it didn't take building the wall; it just took changing the policy
Policy. That's
and the
right.
understanding that, hey, look, we're not going to let you in, and and it was like the faucet just turned off.
Hmm.
I'm but I'm more curious maybe what you I don't know. Trump is he's wild, man. He's just always throwing stuff out there. Um, you
What
know,
is it?
it
He's a bully, but he's our bully. I've heard that. I just heard that on the look. Whatever you think of Trump, I think it's really the previous administration. Totally wacko. Again, on the
it's
border.
hard to understand. It's hard to
Yeah,
make
it's hard.
any sense out of it.
Well, I have
Well,
made sense of
one
it. I think,
one sense, yeah.
yeah, I think, I've been studying politics since 1964. And I think the whole idea here was to get as many people across that border, flood numbers of them into the swing states, and then the idea is, look, we did you a favor, and now do us a favor, vote for us, and now you have a complete power. The Republican Party would have been completely gone, and
Yeah, it would have
yeah,
been trouble.
a lot of trouble. Oh, it would have been. I don't know if the Republicans would have come back from it had they won this election. I
I
think that
think it was
was
going to be close. Yeah.
I think that was the end game all along. And I remember, and two incidents. One is my wife and I are going to a wedding in Hartford, Connecticut, and we just before the wedding we decided to take a walk outside the hotel. And as we veer off, we end up in kind of this rural part of Connecticut with a cemetery, and we see these two well-dressed Indian guys with leather jackets on and cell phones, and they're in the middle of the road hitchhiking. And my wife said, "How odd." Oh, and then she goes, "Oh no, don't talk to them, please. I know what you're going to do." And I said, "I can't help myself. I got to find out what's going on." No, I knew it. Oh, don't get us hurt. And I said, "I won't." So I said, "Hey guys, how you doing?" "Oh, good. We're very good." I said, "What are you doing in the middle of the road?" "Oh, no." I said, "Yeah, you should be hitching on the side, closer to the curb." "Oh, thank you very much." And I said, "How long have you guys been here in the States?" "Oh, we just got here. We flew in." And I'm like, "Oh my God, it's these people. They just flew in.
They
They're
just
they're
yeah,
new,
they're
and they're
getting
looking,
flown
and
in.
yeah, and they have a cell phone, and they're nicely dressed." And I said, "What are you looking for?" "Oh, do you know if we can get work? We're looking for work now." And I said, "No, I'm not from here," and either were they. Um, so that was obviously, they're part of those flights that came in. Then in Memphis, I was a connecting flight in Memphis, and I see these two Hispanic guys, and they're well dressed, and one is kind of like the communicator for the other guy who can't speak English very well. And I said, "Hey, well, yo hablo español." I start talking to them in Spanish, and the one guy says, "Yes, we're just flying in here into the United States. We're going to live here in the United States." And then the other guy turns on me and says, "That's enough. Don't talk to him anymore." I said, "Oh, lo siento. I'm so sorry." But obviously, here were more of the same coming in. It's just, it's just mind-boggling. And then they're eating the
Yeah.
cats and they're eating the dogs. And I know Trump made a lot of fun of it. It became a major hit for that South African singer. But yeah, yeah, the Haitians, that's what they do when they're hungry, and they love ducks. So why not just pull them right out of the pond and, gut them up right there in front of Americans? It was crazy.
Yeah.
Just crazy.
Yeah,
And dangerous. Terrorists, you know, the gotaways coming through. Terrorists, trafficking. The cartels were making bundles of money from coyotes and everything. It was all money. Big
and
business.
that and that's kind of where I want that's actually what I wanted to ask you about. So, w why wouldn't well, number one, the offer to provide U.S. military assistance to combat the cartels. It's so nefarious, and sometimes I just think most Americans, especially if you've never worked in policing or actually worked these cartel cases, like
Right.
they just think it's fiction. Like
Hmm.
they don't connect like the reality of
Yeah.
of fentanyl. Fentanyl
Oh,
starts
oh
in
boy.
China and
Oh
it's
boy.
coming to Canada and it's coming to the U.S. and it's coming
Yeah.
over
Right.
both borders, and and they're doing it intentionally. It's not
Yeah.
like this, some Chinese mafia trying to make a little bit of money. I'm sure they're making some money out of it, but
Yes. Right.
um,
yeah.
People don't realize that the Chinese mafia is operating pretty extensively in the Midwest. And I had John Norris on a couple months ago. John is it was California Fish and Wildlife, and he wrote a fantastic book called The Hidden War. But he was Fish and Wildlife working on cartel grow operations
Oh yes. Oh my God.
in California.
Prolific. Oh,
Yeah.
prolific. I did some PI work and at one point, I got a crazy story about Bitcoin and that, you know, there were this group of people and some guy from Compton, the gangbanger, pulls out this gun that's bigger than him and the lasers on all these people, but he's shining the laser on all these foreheads. One guy's a cartel guy, one guy's Russian mob, one guy's this, that, and then I followed the Bitcoin and it took me to marijuana growers in California. This was bigger than anything. And I said, you know what? I ain't going through these doors. This is very dangerous now. I've done my job. That's enough.
And it's wild. Do you think the U.S. military should be operating in Mexico, even if, even if Mexico says no? I mean, it's almost like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think about the number of Americans
Mhm.
that got wiped out. Now, Big Pharma played a significant role in that, but
Right.
um,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
Pat, our relationship with Mexico is very complicated. Um, you can go back to the times of Pancho Villa, that whole thing. So, uh, and I worked in the Merida initiative with teaching my counterparts in Mexico City. I made several trips there. I got to know the Mexican federales, and at the time, they were getting we were getting more and more cooperation from them. I mean, to the point where they were actually pointing to the drug tunnels that were coming through from Mexico to our border, and they were working with DEA, and it was getting better and better. Uh, I'd like to keep that relationship intact, where we're kind of working with them, but we're not unilaterally bombing the cartels or taking out the cartels, and they have no knowledge. Uh, and Mexico's they're very proud. The Claudia Sheinbaum and the president there, they're very proud people. But they don't mind us working with them and as far as intel, and if we could provide drones, they'll take it and all that stuff. So before we do anything rash, I'd like to see us try to work together as best we could to take out the common enemy.
I do think there's a mutual interest there, and that's why, in the end, and again, it's always hard to understand what's truly going on behind the scenes. Um, I, I take that advice very seriously, right? Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. Like, and
That's a good idea. That's a good
yeah,
idea.
uh,
Um,
and
you,
that play that goes double to the media, and that could be a podcast episode on
oh
its
my
own.
God. Yeah, they had somebody, they were into, I think CNN had a cartel member there saying, we respect Donald Trump. He is a good man. He has his AK next to him. He is a good man. But, you Americans, you have the consumers, so we need to make money. You must, and he's trying to get us to buy into that shit. I'm like, huh? Oh, he's a good cartel guy.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like the
yeah,
MS-13 guy, he's a good father. He's a,
yeah. The
he's a
good,
good
yeah,
husband.
the Tren de Agua guy. That's just like,
Abrego, Mr. Abrego.
yeah, that one. That one is it is a head scratcher sometimes when I sit back and wonder, like who decides which battles you're going to fight and why.
Hmm.
And for the people that have just, I mean, and I applaud the administration for just kind of laying that out for what it is. Like,
Yeah,
hey, do you
yeah,
realize, like,
yeah.
and because I've been through that ringer, right? When you wind up, you have a controversial use of force, and all anybody wants to focus on is the police use of force and not what led to it. And
Right, 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 right.
and
Good
oh,
point.
by the way, in the last 20 years worth of behavior out of the person that's fighting with the police,
Yeah.
that's like suddenly, the criminals are the victims and the
Oh, it's
cops are the
it's ab-
criminals.
it's
It's just,
absurd. It's absurd. It's got to stop.
yeah, and that brings us right back to kind of where we started, right? Where, you know, I, I think some of these pushing back against and people might argue that Trump just does it to an extreme, but I mean, it's I think it's really important that we do push back. Here's like what we talked about with USAID, right? There are people that need help, but now they're not going to get it because you had a small portion of people trying to push programs that had nothing to do with helping people. It was pushing personal agendas,
Right, right.
and then probably trying to launder a little bit of money and make some money
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh,
on the
yeah.
side.
Sure, sure.
Whether it's laundering it or just or fraud or just
Hmm.
just complete
Or
incompetence.
everybody eats. One
Yeah, everybody
contractor to the
eats.
subcontractor will make them all happy, and you vote
Yeah,
for us.
yeah,
That's all.
yeah, and that's probably the bigger driver.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're
But
right.
but we wind up in the same boat again, right with what happened at the border, what was going on, and now trying to fix some of these issues. And here's my last observation because I meant to say this when you were talking about it, but
Hmm. Hmm.
it seems to, and now we have Pope Leo, an American-born Pope
Hmm.
who spent a lot of time in Peru, but Central Mexico, Central America, Latin America, it's a very strong Catholic and Christian, you know,
Yeah,
a nation and
sure.
background for the people that are coming. And I have I have several friends from Mexico, and a good friend of mine. He's a naturalized citizen now. I've known him for 30 years. We worked together in the restaurant business before I was a police officer. Just an amazing person. But you know, a lot of these people, I think maybe they made a miscalculation when they thought just because they're coming over the border that they would vote
Hmm.
for some of
Hmm.
those very, very progressive policies. I don't think so. I
No,
think once
no.
I think once they get here, they're like, I don't believe in that. That's against, it's
Yeah.
really against everything I stand for. And
And,
you know what? It's like
yeah.
it's one thing to believe it. It's another thing to try to have the government cram it down your throat. And I think that's ultimately where people are kind of like, all right, enough is enough.
I think you put it perfectly there. My observation out here in California, I'm in touch with a lot of Mexican Americans. Most of them are naturalized citizens. There may be some of them are still illegal. I don't know, but and other nationalities, Guatemalan, Costa Rican, and I like to talk to people. I like to practice my Spanish, and inevitably I would talk to many of these people, and the what I was getting from them was they didn't like these migrants coming in. They didn't like it at all. They didn't like it. And I'm like, geez, but you're from Costa Rica. Yeah, but these people are bad people coming in here. And, I did it the right way. And the Mexicans were like, yeah, I'm a gardener. Now I'm going to have to give up my gardening business to these dopes. I like it here. So all of them, almost all of them were against this policy. And to me, that was stunning. And I thought, wow, maybe Trump wins. I mean, these guys, these are Hispanics that don't agree with this. I
Well, and
was
I think
amazed.
I think the polls showed that. But all right, let's bring it back and wrap it up because
Okay.
I've had you on here for a while, and but I was curious because you have such a global perspective. We are living in interesting times. I,
Well
you
put.
know, I
Well put. Yeah.
yeah, I I I love your background. I love your story. I love the quote from Hamlet that you have. I'm gonna here. Let me. I'm gonna grab it because you said this about your.
About my
This was
dad.
a quote to your dad,
Yeah.
and I was curious about the inspiration for that. But he, you quoted, dedicated my father, NYPD Deputy Chief Kenneth Strange, Sr., for 38 years of faithful service to the New York city of New York and his love of family. He was a man, take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. Hamlet. Now, I'm probably not the last person to try to quote Shakespeare, but um,
Mhm.
I love that. What's your message to the next generation of cops, to leaders, um, and what you're hoping people will get out of your book
Yeah, well,
moving
look,
forward.
going back to Shakespeare and the quote, it's something that I saw and I said, this is definitely my father, because he was singular. He was a Renaissance cop. He was just, and very few people knew this, but he went through a difficult childhood. There came a point where, well, something happened in his life, and if it went the other way, he would not have been a police officer. They never would have taken him. So just small things in life like that. But he initially joined the monastery, like out of high school. Before he went into the army, he joined the monastery as a Trappist monk. Thank God he didn't stay long, and thank God he left. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But he was into so many. Thomas Merton. He read Thomas Merton. He knew all these. He was a voracious reader. Just a tremendous impact on me, and that's why I had that quote. As far as men and women, going into the breach these days, it's certainly it's not what it used to be like, but it can be like that again, I believe. I finish my book with kind of this epilogue for men and women that are considering a career in law enforcement, and I kind of lay it out because Pat, that it's not for everybody. I mentioned that in the book when that one girl stands up in our class and says, "Love you guys to pieces. I've had a great experience, but what I'm seeing
Wow.
here with you, it's not me, and I'm a teacher." And we applauded her because we understood that. I just say, to young men and women who have an inkling to do this, it's a noble profession. It can be what you make of it, but you have to be aware of the pitfalls. And again, you got to strive for balance and all of that stuff. Everything is laid out there for them. But if they have even a smidgen of an idea to do it, look into it. Contemplate it, try it. Maybe you have to try it and then you don't like it, and okay, but we need you. We need you more than ever. You are what separates us from the jungle out there, and we need you badly.
I love that. Yeah, another quote from your book. Yeah. Um, okay. So there's more questions. We'll have to save it for another time, but I'm going to show the book again. A Cop's Son, Kenneth Strange Jr.,
Thank you.
One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. And you're working on your third book now. So
Yeah,
if people want to read your books, where's the best place for them to go get them?
good question. So the first book, it's Your Camino, the pilgrimage book, and this book are both on Amazon. Cop's Son is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. I also have an author website called Strange Author, and it's kennethstrange1word.com, and you can pick up my book and my blogs. I do blogs as well, so you can read. So I've written stories about saints, WWF, you name it. Like a smattering of everything. So you can find that on my website as well. And then I have this other book. I'm with Post Hill Press now, and they it's the same publisher as Cash Patel is using.
Okay.
Post Hill Press, and I'm hoping that this other book, which is the Saudi Arabia piece, the adventure, will come out later this year or early 2026.
Is that nonfiction or fiction?
It's a memoir. It's
A
true.
memoir. Okay.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
again a coming of age love story. I met my wife in Saudi Arabia, so it goes through princes and crazy times, and then finally, the most beautiful girl in the world.
That's amazing. All right. Well, let's leave it right there. Thank you again. I really appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you for sharing these stories in your book.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for memorializing your career. And I'll definitely, I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to give deep consideration to this pilgrimage.
Oh,
Um,
I think you'd love it. It was special, very special.
okay, folks. All right. That's going to be it for today. I want to thank Ken for his time, for
Thank you.
his passion his
Thank you.
service to our country and around the world. I really do appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. And so until the next time,
Thank
we'll
you,
be
Pat.
10. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be 10:42.